the notion that I'm a member of the Yakuza. It's like you look like a criminal. There's that engagement bait tweet that I quote tweeted a couple of days ago, I think it was, where it was a bunch of bikers in a movie theater, and they would mean it was like a social experiment or some shit, like don't prejudge people, and they're all dressed up like a fucking badass biker gang, and they're mean mugging everybody who came in. It's like, no, you're already threatening them with violence by doing that.
Yeah, we know what a tear tattoo means. We know what it means.
I actually I completely agree with both Casimir and Zulu. I think the reason why all these people are going to the West is not even like because of the opportunities of the West or anything, let alone like ideological alignment. So I had a time to interact with like a lot of like savage Muslims and third worldists in Berlin, and I realized what I absorbed. I'm not saying like this is like 100% what it is, but it's just what I absorbed. They have a hatred and resentment towards Europeans because they have this inferiority complex because they're so bitter because their ancestors that got raped by Europeans or something. And they're feeling that resentment, and they know their countries are still inferior compared to the West, right? Like if you're from fucking Afghanistan, that's obviously like a way more inferior, like shithole, the worst country in the world or something compared to fucking Germany. And they feel that, and they have this inferiority, and they feel like they have to constantly, first of all, validate themselves as equals. But they're doing this in a way where they're being incredibly aggressive towards what they feel inferior against. And second of all, they feel like they're owed that money and resources.
Wait,
yes,
Sue, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. What actually happened is they have been on a winning streak since the 6th century. They have destroyed the Eastern Christian civilization. They have conquered the entire Middle East, North Africa. They have conquered Turkey, conquered Constantinople, went deep into Europe, right? And then and the Turkish Empire, like the latest empire that they had was the Turkish Empire, was gigantic and ultra rich for quite a long time, dominated Europe, basically picked the European country to attack that month, and everybody was shaking in their boots. And then World War I happened, and it all collapsed because it was an empire inherently socialistic. The economy didn't work for centuries, and so it ended up being a paper tiger. And now they have an inferiority complex, which is based on if you watch Turkish TV, what they glorify, what TV shows they produce. You can take a look, and it's all glorification of the imperial past, of dominating everybody else. And this creates a cognitive dissonance with the present experience, which is more recent experience, which is the last sliver historically, the last 100 years out of over a millennia of them dominating. The last 100 years is them losing, and that causes a massive amount of butthurt, exactly as you said. But not because they think that they're inferior, it's because they think they're superior and somebody's cheating them.
So I think I agree with you, but at the same time, let me explain. You're equating like an Arab, an Afghan, and a Turk, which is complete. Turks never got colonized. And please don't think about Turkish nationalists, but they didn't, and that does impact how the Turkish brainwashing is happening in Turkey. Turks do think they're superior to the West right now. They don't feel inferior. They don't hate the West. Like if you go to Turkey, most people are like, oh yeah, like West is cool, America is cool. They don't have a hatred, most Turks, unless it's like a very niche conservative community. It's because Turks never got colonized. Turks did like kick off the British and the French after World War I. But they do feel superior. They're like, oh yeah, these like faggot Europeans, like we're superior to them, and we once like controlled like the biggest empire, and Europeans just got lucky with their colonization. They do have this retarded nationalism going on. Turks in Europe, they are like cringe, and they should be deported, not back to Turkey, send them to like fucking Africa or whatever. It is still a different group. Like, you gotta be fair. This is still a way better and different group compared to like someone from fucking Afghanistan or Iraq. Okay. Arabs and these like weird ass groups, they did get like colonized by Europe, so they do feel inferior. Certain Arabic groups, they do feel inferior and upset about getting colonized. A lot of Arab groups does dislike Turks for the same reason, because they feel upset about the Ottoman Empire colonizing them. Arabs also got colonized by the Turks too. So yeah, I agree about the Turks. I agree with your claims about the Turks, but I think it's different than how Arabs and Arabs living in Europe behave towards the West. Like Turks living in Europe do not support Sharia, or they don't really have negative views of the Europeans as much as like your Iraqi or Somalian living there. And I think it's because the Somalians and the Africans and the Arabs, they have a hatred and they think they're entitled to money because of what happened in the past. Turks really don't think they're entitled to money because like they didn't even lose against. And so someone like a Pakistani moving to UK or a Somalian moving to like whatever, or like Congolese moving to France, what they think is that these people, of course, because they're collectivists, they did this and this and this to my people. Now I ought have this from them. Give me my money. I'm going to take over their country. They cannot be nationalistic because otherwise they're evil colonizers. They're supposed to give everything they have to me. And that's what I was kind of referring to. Like they feel inferior and they think they're entitled to everything these countries have. And they don't understand, just one last thing, I know I'm taking time. They don't understand that the money the West has didn't only come from colonization, because if colonization made you rich, Turks would be the fucking wealthiest nation on earth right now, right? But it's not. But what? Turkey was like one of the biggest colonizer of the world, like what, 300 years ago or 200 years ago? So what happened? So it's obviously not just colonization that made West so healthy. But like people don't understand this. The common understanding is that because they pillaged. So they're like, oh, all this wealth Europe and the US has right now is because they took away from us, not because like the philosophy that these countries specifically have. So that's why they feel entitled to it. Yeah, I'm sorry for taking too much time.
No worries, no worries. I did want to touch on, before Chronic comes in, hi Chronic, I didn't want to touch on the point of colonization doesn't tend to make your country wealthier. It is definitely true. Like, if you look at the accounting of colonies, it tends to be the case that the big imperial center is sending out a bunch of money in order to build up these places for whatever, world domination plans they have, whatever military plans they have. They certainly get things back, but it's not like that classic comic of Europe and the Americas, like just, or sort of North America, I suppose, taking all this money from Africa and South America and all these places back home. It's really not like that for the most part. Let's just look at Rhodesia. Rhodesia was vastly, vastly, vastly wealthier than Zimbabwe. There is, on the fundamental level, a philosophical component to consider here. What is the philosophy that is running that society? That determines how wealthy that society will be. Not whether they have this stuff, in the ground or what have you. Because, I was arguing with this, there was this, Indian nationalist, I'm assuming he was an Indian, in my replies the other day, where he was saying, no, India was super, super duper wealthy before Britain came in and invaded and colonized it. And it's like, okay, well, if all of these different places that Britain colonized were so much wealthier than Britain before we colonized them, how did we actually succeed in colonizing them? How did that happen? The US is vastly wealthier than Nigeria. Could Nigeria colonize the US? I don't think they would be able to step a single fucking boot on soil if they tried to colonize the US. They would be blown up, but from the other side of the fucking globe before they could do anything. If you have a vastly wealthier nation than what you are, you're not going to colonize that thing, especially if it's across the fucking globe from you. You could maybe win a guerrilla war against that nation if they're trying to colonize you, but you're not going to be able to colonize them. It simply isn't going to happen. So, it is just absolute insanity, this notion that Western colonization made these countries poor. They're poor because of the philosophy they adopt. You can see this if you look at what Africans are saying. I believe it was, in fact, Sue who told me a story of Africans where if a charity opens up a well in one town and in one village, then the neighboring villages will get jealous and poison that well, literally poison that well. This is a philosophy of envy, and you're not going to build wealth on that philosophy. You simply are not.
All right, cool. Let's hear from Chronic. Chronic, how's it going, man? Good to see you, or not really see you, but hear from you again. What's been happening?
Well, I can see him because I've got my NSA uplink here, so I've got access to his webcam.
He's got a connections in the Australian Federal Police. Well, I'm gonna be releasing the Arrow of Regression video later today. Probably.
Fuck yeah.
But I was actually an hour behind on the stream, and I didn't realize that it was actually still going. Right? I thought it was I thought I'd missed it, but no. I have two things. First, I want to comment on the colonialism thing because I have a sort of quick thing to say. Basically, colonialism does not create wealth. Colonialism is the result of wealth applied to world conquest, right? In order to conquer the world, you have to become wealthy in the first place, right? You don't become wealthy by conquering the world, right? Every empire, right? Like this is like the cycle of empires, right? You have a nation that becomes wealthy, it goes and expands its borders, and then it develops too many commitments to manage, and then it collapses, right? That's like every empire. Did any of the leftists pay attention to history? No, they studied dialectical materialism for their history class, right? And so, right, like you can see this. You can also think about this in the sense of like, are criminals wealthy people? Does stealing actually make you wealthier? And like in a very naive sense, yes, I can go out and I can get money by taking it from other people, right? But as a class of person, criminals tend to be like very poor people. And not because they don't have opportunities, not because they're like born into poverty, right? You have rich people who then become criminals, right? Like they're born, they inherit a bunch of money, they do some criminal activity, and they spend it all away, right? They go from shirt sleeve to shirt sleeves in 3 generations or 3 misadventures, right? Because they don't have the character qualities that produce wealth, right? And there are a few exceptions to this. It is the most successful criminals who remain wealthy, but it's not because they are like making wealth, or it's because they are in a society which is rewarding their criminal activity, right? So politicians, right, or people who exploit the state's intervention in the economy to become wealthier, they are parasitic in a way, but they're not succeeding in a natural fashion, right? So you can understand that as an aberration, right? And colonialism on a global scale, colonialism can't really benefit from having a government there to benefit it. Like it's not like there's a super state that can subsidize your colonialism, right? You have to, as a nation, as an empire, you have to subsidize your own colonies to engage in this activity, right? And so that's just kind of what I wanted to say about that. But the real reason I came on here is I wanted to dig up a discussion from an hour ago, and I want to say video games are art from the objectivist perspective, I would say. I'm willing to debate that.
Boo! Excommunicate him.
When he said this in
the remnant.
When he said this in DMs, I sent him the gif of me eating the camera. He got Zulu
I
Lord.
actually want to download that gif. I need it for a meme.
There's a couple different versions. There's one version where it has like the Dark Souls "you died" afterwards.
Don't worry, I have a very
Zulu's showing up to the next episode with his suspiciously chronic-sized stomach.
Oh no, that's disgusting. You can't do that. But anyway, what I wanted to say. What was I going to say? I was going to say, yeah, video games are art, because not just in the sense of like, okay, let's say Far Cry 2, right? Far Cry 2 has a story, and the story is depicting some specific concretization of reality, right? Like it's a story about let's talk about GTA, because that was what the original discussion was. Like Grand Theft Auto 5 has a narrative campaign attached to it, right? It has you have a story which you progress through in gameplay, and it depicts criminality, it depicts human nature, right? And it has something to say about reality. So that is an artistic statement, right? And you could say, okay, that is a movie that is attached to the game, right? You could say that there's a narrative that's attached to the game, but the game itself might not have any artistic value. And I would actually contest that as well. The relationship of the player to the game has a statement on reality as well, because the game is a recreation of reality, right? So like Grand Theft Auto 5, the way you get rich in that game is by engaging in criminal activity, by stealing, by being a parasite, right? What is that saying about reality? What is that a concretization of? It's saying you can go out and you'll become wealthy, you'll acquire resources by parasiting on others, right? And you could say, okay, that's only understood in the context of the narrative. You could acquire the same mechanics and place them in a context which describe you as a producer or something, that you're homesteading. You're out there and you're fighting the wilderness full of robots, and you're conquering them to gain wealth. But as I said, like the specific framing of the game and the game mechanics actually has a statement on reality. You can see this even in ancient games like Go. Go is a game of proverbs. It has a commentary on reality, even if it's not right. Like it's very abstract. It's very it's not like commenting on a specific time period or like a specific narrative. But Go can be understood from an aesthetic perspective of the way it's been designed to put forward a specific view of some kind of arrangement, of some kind of proverbial way of living, right? That's what I wanted to say. That's kind of my view on the matter.
But I don't. No, that's my answer to that. No.
No.
So I don't think. So the proverbs in Go, it's not that it is necessarily instilling a certain. It's not that it's concretizing a certain philosophy. It's that you could apply any philosophy to Go if you wanted. But some of those philosophies simply will not work. They simply will not be successful Go strategies. If you try to be a Platonist Go player, you're in fact not going to you're not going to win, right? Because you're not paying attention to what is literally in front of you. You're just trying to, appeal to the Platonic forms of this is the way Go is supposed to be played. I don't like this new meta that AlphaGo is throwing at me, so I'm gonna play the Platonic form of Go, the correct way of Go. And there have been all sorts of different meta changes throughout the history of Go, as anybody who's perused Sensei's wiki will know. There have been many different metas throughout the history, and they fail because they aren't acknowledging the reality of the game, right? So that isn't, in fact, telling you a certain philosophy. It's not concretizing a certain philosophy. It's just a sandbox. You go in and apply whatever philosophy you want to this sandbox. It will either be successful or it won't be successful. It's the same in mathematics, It Go is in a certain sense, similar to mathematics in that way, where you can invent whatever kind of crazy, fucked up rules you want and build a numerical arithmetic system out of that. But does that actually describe anything or not? That's the question. You're a successful mathematician if your system actually describes something that actually exists. And I think the same is true of Grand Theft Auto. I think people who play Grand Theft Auto games are not playing it because they really love the story. They're playing it because they think it's a really fun fucking game. And the story is only in service of being fun. The story isn't in service. Like, if we look at, the alternative, which is Mixtape, which is just a movie that you press buttons every so often in. It's a shitty movie. And they made a game because games seem to get more leeway with story. And games get more leeway with story specifically because they are not pieces of art. They're not supposed to be pieces of art. They're supposed to be a fun thing you play. And the story is only supposed to be there to serve your fun. That's all its purpose is. And if it's doing anything other than that, if it's impeding your fun, well, then it's getting in the way of you playing the game.
I mean, this is pretty trivial. I mean, there are people who just watch movies for fun, right? Like, so there are people who watch the original Avatar, 2009 movie for fun, but that doesn't mean that it's not a piece of art. That's the relationship of certain viewers to the artwork. They're not caring about the specific philosophical meaning behind Avatar, that it's it's an environmentalist screed against humanity, right? They're there because they want to see James Cameron's latest VFX stuff, right? And so James Cameron is getting leeway with the story, but that doesn't mean that Avatar is not a piece of art. And likewise, I don't think that means the Grand Theft Auto is not a piece of art, even though most people don't really care about the story.
Yeah,
right?
so I would say, Grand Theft Auto, the thing is that Zulu is kind of right in the sense that the narrative exists only to serve the purpose of being able to do more crimes and do more stuff
Yeah, okay,
in the
but
game, have more fun.
That doesn't count to the point.
But
Like,
so I agree with you. So, and I was going to bring up
the film.
I was going to bring up the comparative example of Red Dead Redemption 2, right? Because I think that's a far more narrative-driven story. Narrative-driven game than Grand Theft Auto. I think it's got a better narrative, although there are some philosophical issues I have with some of the decisions that are made or some of the way the game plays out. Having said that, yeah, I think Red Dead Redemption, I just think it is a piece of art. Whether you think it's good or not, or whether you think video games are
I do want to clarify. I'm not saying that video games inherently could not ever have artistic components to them. I'm saying to the extent that it's a video game, it's not art. So, ironically, Mixtape is about as artful as a game can get. And that's why it's a very shitty game.
So would you say that the limitations on, the more that the game, for lack of a better word, railroads you into a specific outcome, the more artistic it is? Is that kind of?
Yeah, Chronic. Would you say that a D&D campaign that you play with your bros, would you say that that's a piece of art?
Yeah, that's artful. Specifically, it's because it's not required for you. It's not required for the work to be static in order for it to have a specific philosophical underpinning. The same way real life is not static, right? We have a free will in real life, and there's a specific philosophical underpinning to real life. And artwork An artwork is a concretization of reality, right? It's a specific worldview being put into like a concrete form that can be reproduced and viewed again, right? And that doesn't mean it has to be static. It could be a interactive, right? Like worldview, right? And that's the same thing in a video game, right? If you construct a recreation of reality, but this recreation of reality, it responds to an input by a viewer, by a user, right? That allows you to have it so that there's an extra component, but it's still artistic. You're still depicting some kind of worldview out of it, right? So yeah, to that extent, like you have interactive narratives, you have interactive stories that have a specific depiction that respond to the player's will in a certain way, and the way that the designer makes the game respond to the player's will speaks to the designer's view on reality, right? So you have games. There are games where like no matter what you do, you get a terrible ending, right? That is supposed to give you a negative view on life. It's a nihilistic game. It's on the same level as like, I don't know, a movie which is meant to demoralize you, depress you, right? It's
Picasso's art.
Artwork. Yeah, it's a Picasso game, right? Or something like that. And likewise, there are games where you get rewarded for heroic action and you get punished for being a parasite. You get punished for anti-life behavior, and that'll be something, you know, that's concretizing a worldview that is in line with the objectivist aesthetics and the objectivist ethics, right? That's like that's what you want to see, right? And it's interactive. It's not like you can separate the artistic like static element from the game. They are intertwined in an inseparable way because it has to do with the relationship of the viewer's will to the world that is depicted in the game. Right?
Well, let's try and find like the boundaries to this. Like for instance, would you consider Pong to be a work of art?
Okay, so my view on this is that like rudimentary artwork is still artwork. So like a 6-year-old child's drawing of like, you know, a field is still artistic. It might be very rudimentary, but it's still like they're still concretizing some view of reality. And so I think like that, likewise, even rudimentary games or games that are extremely abstract, they have an artistic like element and they have an artistic view because they're concretizing some fact of reality in a form that is interactable.
Well, I mean, so I think for it to be art, it has to specifically be trying to act as some sort of a guide, even implicitly, as some sort of a guide for human action, right? Like, I just do not see how Pong is a guide for human action, as against simply a game.
Well, I'm gonna give a counterexample then. So, like, let's take some films. So there's a film called Hardcore Henry, right? This movie is basically about a guy who he gets tricked into. He's turned into a cyborg, and then he gets like implanted memories, so that it's part of a test to make sure that like a cyborg army is working. And it's a really like shallow story. And then he goes on like a rampage and he discovers the deception and he goes and fights this guy. This movie, the story is just an excuse for the filmmakers to have like a whole bunch of action scenes and sequences. Or like John Wick. Likewise, like the later John Wick movies are basically just an excuse for Keanu Reeves to go around like shooting dudes. But is this not an artwork? Is this like just because it's not like, I don't think that's really concretizing a guide to action, right? I don't think the filmmaker really had that in mind. And like, that's not really what this movie is about. It is concretizing like a particular view of reality because they're depicting reality. But I don't think the filmmaker is saying this is how you should behave, or this is like I don't think so. I don't think that's really
well. So John Wick, that is basically the hero's journey.
Has an ethical message, but like,
well, it's the hero's journey. Like that's the meta myth.
That's the first movie. I'm talking about like the later, like 3 and 4, where like basically there's just like it's just an excuse for him to keep shooting dudes, right? Like he's not going anywhere. Have you seen the later movies in that franchise? It's kind of like the first movie. Yes, I would say that there's a significant like message to it. But I'm specifically talking about the later ones, or like Hardcore Henry, or movies there where like the story is just basically an excuse for the filmmaker to do cool visual effects or do cool scenes, like action scenes and stuff.
Like Fast and Furious.
Fast and Furious, that's a good one. Or like, I don't know,
Terminator, not Terminator.
Terminator
might be a good example.
Then I suppose the question is Fast and Furious a piece of art, or is it just?
Yeah, I would say clearly. Like, I think they're concretizing a specific view of reality, even if it's just like, even from the director's perspective, all they're doing is just like making something that's fun. They are just by the fact that they are making a fictional depiction of some like environment, some action, some narrative. They have an implicit philosophy, just like the way that someone might have an implicit philosophy in their life. They have an implicit philosophy when they're making their fiction, right? And it comes out in their art, which, you know, and likewise, on the other hand, you have people who have a very explicit philosophy when they're writing their work, like Ayn Rand. She explicitly has something she's trying to concretize. There's people who write their art, write their novels specifically to have some kind of message. but likewise, it doesn't mean that people who have an implicit philosophy have no philosophy. And likewise, it doesn't mean that artworks that don't have an explicit message don't have an implicit artistic element.
I think we might be in a triangle situation here. Peikoff, I believe it was, identified that humor is almost the inverse of art, where in art you are identifying the metaphysically significant and trying to get people to follow that, in effect. Whereas in humor, you're identifying the metaphysically insignificant. That was like his nascent form of like a theory of humor. Perhaps there's another spoke here.
I think she's like pressing her hands up.
Sure. She could come in after this. I think there perhaps is another spoke here where gaming is on the same like liminal space, if you will, but not the same spoke as art. Could that perhaps be a thing? I don't know what that spoke would be defined by, but that could perhaps be what we're getting at here, because you could interpret humor in an artistic way, right? It is concretizing some certain view, but it's not doing it in the same way as art is doing it, right? It's doing it in a completely different way to art is doing it.
Well, actually, I would say the humor is an art form, because like you can see different comedians, and different comedians have a different like underlying premise to their comedy, right? If you watch a George Carlin show, he has very anti-life. He really wants to demoralize the audience.
Right. Because
he takes great things and he makes them little. And on the other hand, you can have comedians who point out the absurdity of like evil things, right?
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It's doing the same sort of thing, but from the flip side. That's why it's not art. So art, you're focusing on David and his virtues. In humor,